I get to ask you questions now.
Yeah. The negative version is how little time and effort some professional analysts take in understanding what software is, since it's their profession. And then if you've got lots of attendees that you don't care, you're talking about building a software platform on large data sets where the end product is not a choice between finding terrorists and civil liberties, but resolving the problem. That, and then moving to various other products we produced, but like most notably Foundry platform, where we're talking about revitalizing and if necessary replacing or building our product into the infrastructure of a modern enterprise as if it was actually modern today with data protections. These things have been so far ahead of, now we're talking about AI that actually is operational, at least in the kind of more clandestine context we're allowed to talk about it, or moving some of those insights to the edge with dealing with the needed ability to interpret, but also figure out the subset of data that's necessary while dealing with compute and other issues at the edge. That those things are so far ahead of the common sense of what's been done in the past. I worried we would struggle to find people that would actually engage with that. And Palantir has approximately 1.5 million investors. These are people who have taken the time to actually understand what we're doing, but also have taken the courageous act of saying, okay, well, what if some of the things that we've learned about how the world will work are actually no longer true? And what will the world, in a world where, in fact, what we tend to, in shorthand, call it alpha, is directly tethered to or being generated by what we call software. That's a very strong leap of faith, especially in the enterprise context, because as most people know, many software products offer limited to no value today, let alone aspire to be transformational in the future. I think the cultural change of what it means to be at Palantir, which is you get to work on the transformational software of tomorrow with some of the more interesting people in the world in your company and some of the most interesting clients outside of your company, that hasn't really shifted. In fact, I would say in general, it's become in some ways easier. I would say, though, the most important thing for me is I personally, people like you who are long-term veterans at Palantir, we're sitting on a pile of things that, you called equity, that were not only declining in value, but were illiquid and stayed. And I had a lot of pressure to make sure that, people who had, invested their labor, that you bore the fruits of that investment at some point in the future, especially since it's not the case that everyone stayed at Palantir because of me, but some people did. And so it's like, of course there's bureaucracy and other things, and trying to do my best to not blow up the company with every statement I make, but the relief of not having this pressure on my back is enormous and very, very freeing.
Yeah.
And so I'm happy about that. And I'm very happy for, the people like you who, you remember all of our discussions and when Foundry started, it's like, and the thing is, when you're working on products that are not understood, like most people have like a report of what other people have done, and then now they're going to try and make it a little better and hire 5,000 people to sell it, right? Palantir doesn't do that. We've never done that. And what we do is we have lots of clients that are working on really cool products, and we begin to kind of iterate on what are the underlying problems of which they're not mostly aware. The negative externality for most people of stopping terrorism was forgetting about civil liberties. The negative externality of protecting civil liberties was you had terror attacks. How do you solve both? Not that different. Like, how do you actually get an algorithm to be so functional that it is approaching or becomes what people call AI in a context where data is unlimited? How do you push that to the edge? How do you get Foundry to install in hours in a context like COVID, so that you can actually distribute the vaccine, where the databases like in the UK are massively siloed? The answer to the problem will save thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of lives. but we were working on these problems before there was COVID. It's like there's a narrative like, well, suddenly COVID came and then Palantir flourished, but like we built a product assuming disjunction. And then there's, what does it mean to build a product? There's been many iterations of solving the specific needs of each client while building a motor that is universally applicable requires a kind of depth and elasticity of the software and the code that very, very few institutions could even really approximate an understanding of, yet alone build. Managing that at scale so that we don't have to change our culture, which, Apollo looks to, Wall Street analysts who take the time to actually look at our products, which is not enough, honestly, as like a unit economic nirvana, and that it is. But the reason why Apollo is important to us is it's a cultural nirvana. It allows us not to hire. We still roughly have the same number of people we did a year ago. Yeah. And, it's like, and then, but our company is expanding rapidly. And that allows us to have a very narrow, tight, and specific kind of culture while having a broad ability to service the world with our software. Yeah, I find it super heartening to, when we interact with people, investors and others who are technical enough to understand the problems we've solved, and then have taken the time to go deep enough into the product demos to understand that, we've actually solved a lot of these problems. And it's enormously gratifying to have an external cacophony of, interest where the interest is pretty technical. It's like, it's surprising how much time and energy and thought the average person puts into understanding our software. That's the positive. The negative version is how little time and effort some professional analysts take in understanding what software is, since it's their profession. The lagging indicator with sales. Now, obviously our sales are kind of going very well, but what's powering it is our products that are just differentiated is way too modest. They're completely unique, and both in terms of how they're built and how we service them and how we interact with clients and how we're building currently. Also, look at the speed of our product development over the last 2 years. It's actually, sped up. It completely just while doing a DPO, while creating a sales force. It's like we're accelerating on all fronts. Yeah. We've been able to retain and recruit the very, very best people since inception. And this is like, as you know, been a constant frustration for Silicon Valley, that we disproportionately got the best people to not only come to Palantir, but stay. Mm-hmm. And we are still very focused on recruiting the very best, most inquisitive, hardest working, insightful, primarily technical talent in the world from any place we can find it. Because the net has gotten wider, more people know who we are, but also because as technical people engage with our product, because they may just be looking at it as like an investment option, and they're like, wow, okay, this is real. And so like typically when people IPO, the quality of people you're able to recruit and retain goes down. Mm-hmm. I don't think that's been the case for us, because before we were very much niche. So if you were at a super elite school, who you might know people work at Palantir, and therefore you would know the quality of the engineers and the products. But if you weren't, you might not know it. Now, if you're just sitting out there anywhere in the world and like you're like, you've probably heard of us, and you're like, hey, engineers are very, very skeptical, as you know. You're an engineer. So if somebody's claiming, oh, this product has great software, what's the first thing you're going to do? Yeah. Go think, oh, this isn't great. I'm going to go check it out. Yeah, and it's like, it's usually, by the way, not so great. It's usually like 5,000 salespeople and a completely rusty product that was randomly written somewhere and has limited utility and negative utility in most contexts outside of what it was created. So you come to Palantir and, it's like you just go looking at Palantir, like, okay, well, let me look at what I think they're doing with the code base. And you're like, wow, that's cool. That's cool. Wow, that's super cool. Oh, this looks like a problem they're actually working on that they're not yet talking about. I'd like to be involved. And then, of course, once you've gotten past that hurdle, then you look at the quality of the people. And, technical people have very precise ideas of what that would mean, i.e. people as good as I am or better. Yeah. And so then you look at internally at Palantir, and what you're expecting to find as a technical person is 50 marketing people that claim they know software because they stayed at Motel 6 or they worked at a bank, covering software in the 80s, but have no earthly clue what we're doing now. And what you find is like leadership that from beginning to the end actually is working on driving these things. And that just leads to a recruiting charisma. And we're really seeing very strong interest in joining Palantir. We ran the company where everybody has a part in the company. From an equity perspective and a participation in the company, we also give people at Palantir enormous responsibility, which is appealing. If you're, you just say you've just left school and you believe and maybe are the world's best software engineer of one archetype or another, do you really want to work 30 years under somebody before you actually get to write code to the trunk? Or do you want to be writing code that's actually used from people that might actually know some things about writing code that you didn't learn in school that are at your level or conceivably better? And so that leads to this very positive dialectic. And I believe internally it's like, look at the quality of the people we have, and then you can imagine these people running Palantir. Like when now their office are reopening and I'm making an effort to meet people, I see people who will be, running parts of Palantir in the next couple of years, not people that are just going to be working for the Palantir version of the man. Yeah. So, and that's really, really cool. Yeah. Foundry is objectively the best commercial software product in the world. And again, don't feel free to judge it by the numbers. If you're technical, go look at the product. But a simple way, just look at the people it's attracting to work at Palantir. They go look at Foundry. You're sitting there as somebody who's a world-class engineer that wants to work somewhere, and they go look at what we're doing and like, okay, I want to work on that. That's why our recruiting is so strong. Post DPO, which again is like highly anomalous. So we didn't have, our first commercial products were failures, and that's not actually, there's a tendency, unfortunately, outside of the US, and it's one of the reasons why the US is so strong in this, that we embrace trying and failing, right? So it's like that, there's no shame in our failures. It's like we learned a lot and we applied it to when we started building Foundry, but like we have the best product in the world. We have also a stature and access that we didn't have before. We have resources we didn't have before, both financial and reputational. And we have a lot of knowledge about how you interact with an institution and how not to interact. And I would say we've probably matured, at least in our interaction with clients. It's not perfect. It's very hard if you're a technical, it's still the case 70+% of Palantirians that come are technical, and maybe even 15%, the people who are not software engineers would be called engineers at any other company. Those kind of people, the people that we attract and work hard to retain, don't always interact well with institutions that are, 85% non-technical. And so that's always going to be a problem for us. We're getting better at it, but obviously it's never going to be perfect. And so that there'll always be a way in which, Palantir will overperform technically compared to other institutions, in my humble opinion, dramatically outperform any other institution in the world on the software product. If you just look, like normal companies have one product that is 10 years old and then they're acquiring companies. And there's a lot of technical issues in that are massively underestimated because actually these products the code bases are not meant to come together. But even culturally, there's obviously enormous issues. Palantir has built what amounts to hundreds of products. Like Foundry is hundreds of products in one product, fully integrated, and now will be made also fully disintegrated. So it's like we're really, really good at that. So we significantly outperform all others on the technical development and delivery. We're outperforming people if you do apples to apples today. If you do apples to apples, we're simultaneously betting on what people are going to be doing tomorrow. And then so it's like a Hegelian thing where when you get to tomorrow, the stuff that even if it worked today is not going to work because it doesn't conform to the expectations of what an enterprise is going to have to do in 5 years. And if the curve is like this in our production, and the normal curve would be like that in software production, the monetizing the curve. So if like a normal company would produce this and then they'll monetize this, we produce like something that like is nearly unbounded, but then we have to do that because our monetization will always be less than the curve itself. Whereas actually what most software companies are doing is they're producing a much smaller integral of like actual software production than the revenue they can extract from that production. Whereas we're producing a nearly unbounded integral where we monetize, we have to learn over time, how do you actually extract revenue value out of that, because the full value of the integral shows up in 5 years. Yeah. In the common sense consciousness of more kind of conventional businesses and financial people. And so that's another reason why internally we have to be so focused on building this like transformational software that's existential to the future and highly relevant now, because we will never compete on the axis of extracting more value than the value you've created that other companies are just much better at, you know? And so that's our disability, and we have to just be completely cognizant. If you're going to ship software built by people that are basically nearly all technical to enterprises that are learning how to work with this specific kind of technical product software. It's different than working with a mechanical product. Yeah. You have to massively outperform on the quality of the software side, or it'll be disaster, because you're not going to outperform on quote unquote the sales side. And that's what makes our business very special. Real world-class engineers don't want to work for like the world's most perfect sales machine, right? With a thin product. And that's the problem for them. And that's why these companies have to really, really do acquisitions. Acquisitions are often fraught with technical issues and cultural issues that people underestimate. What we do is we are building these products that are just like massively valuable, and then we're allowing the macro conditions to catch up with the product that we build. And it's actually quite dangerous, because if we're wrong about the macro conditions, we're wrong about the product development. Our ability, the way in which we approached AI, completely different than anyone thinks. The way we approach operations in the special forces context, completely different. The way we're going to move the AI technology edge. We're building on assumptions that are not broadly accepted, but they will be accepted. We're betting on that, and I'm pretty certain we're going to be right about a lot of things, because we're already seeing that the operational output the delta is much greater than what anyone else has done. That's highly charismatic to the people we need to come to Palantir. By the way, it's also charismatic because the cultural aspect, if you're doing this, just makes technical people feel at home. Like, you're not going to feel at home. Now, of course, as we've become a public company, we've had to overlay like salespeople and other things, and then engineers run around say like are afraid, like, are we going to become like, we're obviously not going to mention names, but all the companies that engineers don't respect, that Wall Street people sometimes love, but like actually are like just not charismatic to technical people, because they're not actually solving real interesting technical problems, or the problems that they're claiming to solve are never being solved. And so like, are we going to become that? And the honest answer is, of course not. But you are going to have to see that we're going to have to change and adapt, and actually find ways, not just for the revenue. It's like the way in which like the more vulgar economics of it are right is, revenue is a sign of impact in the sense that you actually got someone to deploy your product and pay for you. And we've been exceedingly good on that score. That's why some of our contracts are so large and meaty, because people see the enormous value we create. Now we're going to democratize this in the sense that more people are going to see that value. But that's the internal dialectic. But like from an internal perspective, we've moved from like here to here, and probably from an external perspective, here to here. But every other company is like, 5,000 kilometers in a different direction on like these things. And like we've moved a kilometer. It's one thing to sell a product that is like, it's like A plus B plus C minus F. It's another thing to say, we're the whole alphabet. And by the way, we're the alphabet of the future. And you're not going to recognize everything we have. You don't have real criteria to evaluate, but it will work. And over time, you will understand why it works. And you will not be satisfied with these things. This is like, the thing that is really interesting about Palantir is, once you've bought Palantir and you've used it and it's been implemented in a way that actually works, it's a hard thing because there's a cultural change on both sides probably to actually use the software of the future today. And we've seen this in every context, not just the military, not just Intel, but across industry. But once you've gone through that, you're very unlikely to be satisfied with what you're going to get on the market. And this has given us one of the reasons we've survived despite our charming personalities is people are like, yeah, the personality's a little bit odd, but the software is really performant. Yeah. And the more you use it, the more performant it becomes for people. But yeah, there's a big cultural issue there. Yeah. There's a lot of attention on the SPACs because obviously we're investing in some of the most interesting creative companies in the world. And they're relying on Foundry to, get the business to a point where it can really be even more disruptive. But I'll tell you, the one of the coolest things, obviously, that it would be hard to notice externally is these people are going to push our product and help us understand, we can't rest on the fact that we're 5 years ahead of people. Tomorrow, you're not 5 years ahead. Yeah. So it's and these people pushing our product and pushing what they're going to do. These are relatively small companies. Yeah. Compared to, but they're really pushing us to work on product. And by the way, it's super inspirational. It's one of the things that's gotten us through the bad times. Our customers were so inspirational. Yeah. The nice thing about some of these small companies is they're inspirational. They really push us to build things, to do things that we hadn't done before in ways we hadn't thought about, and to deliver value that is not, maybe not in a way that we had preconceived. I think it's easy to focus on the biggest customers, and some of our biggest customers are also some of the coolest customers in the world, no doubt. But a lot of these agile kind of custom customers we're interacting with either because they're buying our software or because they're using our software they're just under the gun. To win as an unknown quantity, we used to run around saying we were 5% of the cost, 1% of the time. I believe this to be still true. So what I would tell any entrepreneur that thinks they're going to disrupt, you have to be 20 times better, at least. So it's if you think you're going to disrupt with some linear kind of, we are better on this axis, but worse on that axis, and it's very linear, that's not a tech business, and you won't disrupt. And so we shouldn't forget that at Palantir. By the way, it's refreshing to see other people that are living and breathing that, because we cannot afford to ever forget. If we are not demonstrably better than other people, no one's going to put up with our charming personalities. What we produce is rare and highly differentiated, and no one puts up with us because it's just the same thing as everyone else, but a tiny bit better. That's what normal companies can do. So these companies that you don't respect enough because you look at the quality of some of their kids, but they do things that we can't do that. We must never try to. We will fail. They are much, much better at that than we are. One of the things about a lot of the best companies in the world, having 1,000 specs of what you think it should do and the way it should work in the future only makes sense if you want to spend money for something that doesn't work. If you want to spend money on something that works, you can pay less money and you show it working today. Okay, common sense to every engineer, not common sense to most institutions, still not enough common sense to most governments in the world. The US government became common sense, so that's how software increasingly is purchased, is one of the reasons we're doing so well there. Became common sense to say the government of England and innumerable other countries. That's why they bought our product. They didn't buy it because they particularly were buying into my German PhD and my cross-country skiing or Palantir's narrative or anything. In fact, many cases they bought it despite that. Most cases maybe. But they learned, software is not something that exists on a PowerPoint purely. You must see it in action. And by the way, this was very much linked to other good decisions that were made. So it's a learning process. And then the question is, how quickly can an institution or society learn? Then there's another thing here that just is not believed at a common sense level. So what I've just said, people are yeah, okay, that makes sense and blah, blah, blah. But non-software people just view software as normal technology. So one camera is 20% better than another camera, but then they capture that difference mostly in price. So maybe you pay 30% more for a 20% more better camera, and then if you've got lots of attendees that you don't care, but if you're highly technical, you find the camera that costs 20% less, that's 10% better, or that'd be more like the engineering approach, and then you build some new thing into it, and you've got the best camera in the world at a cheaper price, right? But software is not like that. It's like it is the best software in the world is it's binary. Like if you look at the way we build software, like using revisioning database, the way in which people write software and using it to manage data, that approach is not just 20%. It's not 20% better. It's like creates a new world that in its output can go into do things simultaneously that are maximally contradictory to most people. And people struggle with this because the common sense version of it is, well, it's like hiring a lawyer or buying a camera. You kind of roughly get what you pay for. It's priced. You could hire more hours from the bad lawyer and it'll be almost as good as the good lawyer. Or like the technical version is, like buying a car, blah, blah, blah. That's just not how software works. And it leads to massive societal problems because, of course, it leads to massive societal inequality. It is not just the result of it's just a completely different way of doing business. It's and so these are obviously Palantir's involved in making non-technical people behave as if they were technical, meaning their actual value in the workplace goes up and they'll live better and they're less replaceable. And that's one of the reasons we've been so adopted by industrials that have highly trained workers like auto manufacturers and others. But in any case, the societal problem is that people implicitly have a deep belief in something that's no longer true, which is that these things are linear and captured in price. And so the political equivalent is that they're these things are less disruptive than they are. The business equivalent of it is people assume that one piece of software and the ability to implement it is going to be roughly the same. So you can leave your structures the same, but then you capture the value by lowering the price, when in fact, it's like if you installed the right software in COVID, you saved thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of lives. And so it's and that's just not the common sense. And then the financial equivalent would be they think you can capture the value of the software purely by looking at the growth, which our growth and all these things are quite favorable. But in fact, that's just not, that just completely misses the beast. It's not actually how this works, which is where the technical people thinking about and hopefully joining our company and staying are much closer to the means of production than the people who are in charge of evaluating the means of production. Our product is used widely in the US, the UK, Israel, and a number of other countries that seem to have also been good at purchasing the vaccine. And so what has surprised me is it seems the ability to purchase software and the ability to make other technical decisions it's not a question of causation, but it does seem more correlated than I would have imagined. Much more correlated. And that really surprises me. So this is why I think we should be even more passionate about teaching people, not just so they buy Palantir, but one of the purposes of we must teach people who are not interacting with software how this works, because it seems to be highly correlated to making other decisions that are, quite frankly, life and death decisions. And even when they're not life and death, it's survival of your industry. We're powering industries that, hire hundreds and hundreds of thousands of people. And independent of the ability to evaluate software products, it seems, again, much more correlated than I would have imagined. The ability to evaluate software and the ability to evaluate, well, what should I do under these decisions involving a technical product, like a vaccine, and under what conditions do you purchase it and how you distribute it, is seems to be borderline causation, as if not, it's certainly strong correlation. And that's actually very much surprised me.